So I often wonder if I'm the only person who actually gets really excited about these old school boxes, these early 2000s packaging for these scanners. Got the Coolscan 9000 and then the 4990, which I just picked up. And you know, like, look at this. Includes a USB cable, just like so much value with this thing. Anyways, also welcome to my new office, which I had big plans for this place. I was pretty excited about it, and then basically all of the furniture that I bought is back ordered. So yeah, my dreams have not come together yet. But anyways, let's get into things. Okay, so in today's video, what I want to do is I want to show you how you can actually get some pretty nice 35mm film scans using a cheap, older Epson flatbed scanner. So if you follow this channel, you know that I use a Nikon Coolscan 9000 to scan most of my work, and I've been really happy with how it performs for both 35 and 120, but it's definitely not cheap. It's getting harder to find, and unfortunately, when it comes to other options that can handle both formats, you're kind of stuck with Epson flatbeds for the most part. And you know, in the past, I've never really been that happy with how they perform for 35mm film. But recently I bought the 4990 because I need a scanner to do 4x5. I've actually owned it in the past back in Canada, and I've owned an Epson V550. But when I got it here, I figured I'd spend some time just really kind of digging into it with 35mm film, hopefully trying to find a way where you can get some pretty decent results just for anyone out there who's searching for kind of a cheaper, more affordable option that can scan both 35mm and 120. So today I'm going to share my workflow. We're going to jump into things, and this isn't necessarily going to be scanner specific, as every scanner is probably going to be a little different in terms of its capabilities, but this is more so just to give you an idea of what you can do with these files. I also want to note as well, just like with everything when it comes to film scanning, there's a lot of different ways to do something. This is just my approach. It's not the right or the wrong or the best way or anything like that. It's just what works for me, so take from it what you will. Okay, so jumping into things, I have an image here that I scanned on both the Epson and also the Nikon Coolscan, which we can kind of use to compare. But what we're going to talk about today is sharpening in detail and resolution, and that's kind of the struggle with these Epson scanners. You know, this image here was 35mm, obviously, on the 4990, and this probably looks pretty familiar if you've ever used a flatbed to scan your 35mm film. Just soft, and it's lacking detail. This has actually had some capture sharpening done. So today I'm going to kind of show you, you know, prepping an image for web. We're going to look at a smaller print, an 8x12, and then getting up to a little bit of a, say, a medium-sized print, 12x18, which is where the limitations start to come in. But I'm just going to show you kind of how important it is to prep these Epson files and just be able to kind of get the most out of them. Because if you just took this file as is and exported, you know, an image for the web, it's not going to look great because this initial file does not look great. And I'm not going to dig into the details too much. I'll show you a quick process. If I was going to use the Epson as my kind of full-time scanner, which I'm obviously not, then I would spend a lot more time really finessing this workflow, but this will give you kind of the mindset to work with and some initial tools, and then you can go and test from there. So basically we'll start with prepping for a web, and we'll compare kind of the two files from there. So I will note as well quickly, I used ViewScan and Negative Lab Pro, so I did a raw DNG in ViewScan, Negative Lab Pro to do the conversion, and when you're working with Negative Lab Pro, I'll just show you this quickly. Let's see if we can open it up. Okay, so it gives you these sharpening presets, and basically there's off, leave as set, just goes defaults to kind of Lightroom's initial settings. And then there's lab and scanner. And basically lab is like a kind of like a smoother sharpening. It doesn't have, you can see here, this detail is set to 0. It's just using the radius and the amount. Scanner bumps the detail up, radius down, amount down. And basically it picks these values based on the resolution of your image. So this will actually vary between the Coolscan and the Epson because the resolution is different. But I always use this lab setting because it's really not aggressive at all. So you'll see if we go into 100%, this is with it on and this is with it off. So it's just a really kind of subtle capture sharpening. This is all gonna be personal preference. Play around with them, see what works for you, but I found it gives me a nice kind of base to work with, and it's not kind of heavy-handed or anything like that. But let's jump to these TIFFs. Again, ignore the color and how these look, the differences between the two. That's not the point of this video. It's more so just how to work with these Epson files and get them looking the best as possible from a detail standpoint. So let's go ahead. We're going to open both of these in Photoshop. So the Nikon and the Epson. And we'll go from there. So that's the Epson. Let's get the Nikon open. What's going on here? Come on. So we'll start with the Nikon file. As you can see, if we go into 100%, just with that initial capture sharpening, this is at 4000 dpi, the scanner's max resolution. It looks great. You could dig into this a little bit and be a little bit more, get a little bit more fine with it. But as a starting point, this file looks amazing. And all I would do if I was gonna prep this for web, so let's say Instagram or a website or something like that, I use this preset panel. It's by a guy named Tony Kuiper. I'll link to it below. This is something I used to use when I did a lot of landscape photography. It's basically all these presets for these luminosity masks. So you can select different values in an image and adjust those. I don't use that anymore for the work I'm doing now, but it does have this really awesome web sharpening action. So you basically pick your kind of final image size. For web, like Instagram and stuff like that, I'll usually always do around 2000 pixels. For website, maybe a bit bigger than that. Basically what you do is you pick that and then you pick your long edge, so horizontal. You hit OK. And I'm not sure the exact details, I can't remember them anymore of what it's doing, but I'm pretty sure it up-reses the image, applies sharpening, down-reses it, sharpens, and then down-reses to your final resolution or something like that. Regardless, it does a really nice job. It leaves you with this folder here, and you can kind of set the opacity of how much fine detail you want. With this Nikon file, you can see using that preset, it looks amazing. It would look great at 2500, 3000 pixels. Good to go. We didn't have to do much with that file. And I will save these as well and throw them in a folder. You can download them just to get a feel for what this looks like, not on YouTube. But if we go and we look at this 4990 file, we aren't starting with anywhere nice of an image. It looks soft, really kind of mushy. And this was scanned at the 4990's full resolution, which is 4800 dpi. And with flatbed scanners, they always have very high kind of claimed resolution numbers. I have found, and a lot of people agree as well, what you read online is that they're usually around half that. So people say the 4990 is around 2000 to 2400. I did some tests, down-resing myself in Photoshop versus scanning at 2400 dpi in ViewScan. I like to work with this full resolution file. Again, you might find another way it works, but what's important right now is, since we aren't starting with a nice file like that Nikon, we have to get this full res looking a little bit better. So I'm gonna just go through this quick. I would suggest checking out, I did a video about printing workflow, I'll link to it as well. I go into my sharpening methods in a little more detail there, but what I would do first is I just did a duplicate layer that I'm gonna set to overlay, and then I would use this high pass filter. And for something like this, I would have it set around 3. This is just doing some edge sharpening. So you can see that's with it on, and that's with it off. And that's with it back on. So if you look around here in these bushes, it's starting to bring some detail back. So I would merge that now. I'm going to do another duplicate layer. I'm going to set this to luminosity, and then I'm going to use unsharp mask. And I'm going to be quite aggressive with this as well, because we are going to down-res this image ourselves. That's important to kind of remember. We'll be quick with this. Let's stick with somewhere around that. You'll see that's with it on, that's with it off. So basically all I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get this full res initial Epson file to look more detailed. And since, like I said, we're going to be down-resing it, I usually go a little bit heavy-handed with this, because now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to image size, I'm going to go to percent, and I'm just going to cut it in half by 50%. So now it's kind of down to that 2000 or 2500 dpi point, or what it would be if we scanned it at that originally. And this is at 100%. So now we're at a point where the initial image file that we're starting with is looking a lot better. It's not this kind of soft, mushy image. And now I would go and use this exact same preset that we just used. We'll run that, we'll let it do its thing. And I would drop this a bit, but it looks great. I mean, this is a small file, it's 2000 pixels, 2500 or 3, it would probably look the same, but it looks really detailed and nice. You know, if we compare the two, there's almost no difference at all. So for web, you know, obviously no issues at all, but what's important, like you saw, is taking that initial full res Epson file and, you know, being a little heavy and applying some aggressive sharpening to it, down resing it in half, sharpening it a little bit more from there if you want, and then using something like this preset to bring it to your final web size. So it looks good. You know, obviously the Nikon is a lot nicer of a file to start with. You could take this Nikon file, even in Lightroom, and just export it using one of their kind of settings here, you know, 2000 pixels, sharpen for screen. I'm sure it would look fine. But if you did the same thing with the Epson, obviously it wouldn't look nowhere near as good. You could dig in here in Lightroom and use some of their sharpening afterwards to try and do similar to what we did in Photoshop. I'm just used to working in Photoshop, and I like that kind of high pass method to bring some kind of detail back into the image. But as you can see, these two look great. Download them below if you want to check them out. So for web, you know, 35mm, you can get it looking just as good as this Nikon version. But let's close all these out again. So we're going to jump now into printing. We'll just start from scratch. I'll close those and we will go and open them again. So there's the Epson. Okay, and there's a Nikon. So let's say we want to do an 8x12 print, you know, smaller print size. Really quick here with the Nikon. Again, initial file looks great. So all I would do is I would go to image size, go to inches, we'll size this to 12x8, and I would just bump this resolution up. Let's go to 400. Something like that. Still looks great. You know, I may just do a really light unsharp mask. Drop this way down just for a bit of fine detail. Again, check out my printing video if you want to learn a little bit more about my methods, but I will say usually I over sharpen my images a little bit when I'm going to print them because you're obviously transferring an image from a screen to ink on a paper and you do lose a little bit of that sharpness that you would see on the screen. So, you know, something like that. And then what I do is for higher res images, like things that are at like, you know, 320, 400 and plus DPI, I found viewing them around 50 to 66.7%, somewhere around there, gives you a really good kind of representation of what they're going to look like when they're on paper. So this file looks great, super sharp. This would print as a really nice 8x12, but let's jump to this Epson. So we're back to this original file, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do the exact same thing we did before. So we gotta get this original file looking better. We're gonna use one of these high pass layers. Same setting, and then same thing again. I'm gonna do an unsharp mask. We'll bump this radius back up, be pretty heavy-handed with it, just to get this initial file looking better than it did. So now what I'm gonna do though, instead of cutting it in half, for printing, I'm gonna take this full res image, and now we're just gonna go and we're gonna size it to our print. So we're gonna go 12x8. I'll bump this up. I'll keep it the same as the Epson 400. We could go higher on that resolution if we wanted. So there we go. So that's at 100%. And now I would also go and do a light unsharp mask to this. This one that's been sized now for our print size. And I would drop that radius. Again, just looking to bump up that fine detail a bit. Something like that. Again, this is really quick. I'd probably spend a little bit more time on this, but the point is, if we go and look at this now at 50%, it's gonna print really nice. There's a lot of detail there. If we cycle between the Nikon and the Epson, I think you would have a pretty comparable 8x12 print out of both of these machines. So no issues there. So it's just working with that initial Epson file and not being put off by this, you know, soft kind of mushy image. So 8 by 12, no issues. We're gonna do one last print size, 12 by 18. And this for me is where you start to kind of get to the limits of what the Epson can do. We'll start with the Nikon. Same deal as before. We got that nice image to start with. So we're just gonna go and we're gonna size this. So we're making a 12 by 18. Say we'll do 320 resolution, which would be fine at 12 by 18. You know, we're bumping the image size up just a wee bit, but nothing to kind of worry about. So we do something like that. If we go into 100%, this is still looking great. Just like before, all I would do to this Nikon file is probably just a really light unsharp mask. Won't go into too much detail with that one. So if we drop back down to 50%, even at 66.7, this file is still really detailed. It's gonna print nice at 12 by 18. No issues there. Actually, let's leave that open for a second. Okay, Epson one again, same deal. Do this quick. You guys are probably getting the idea with this one now. Same high pass layer, merge that. Unsharp mask to bring out some of that kind of finer detail. Okay, so we're back at that kind of point that we were before when we were resizing this to the other versions. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to image size. We will set this to 12 by 18. We will also do 320 just like we did with the Nikon file. Something like that. So now you'll see at 100%, you know, it doesn't look anywhere near as good as the Nikon, but it still doesn't look bad. And I would take this and I would do some work now on this sharpening, just prepping it for this print size. Obviously not like that. We'll drop this back down. I may go and use one of those high pass layers again, just a lot less aggressive. And same with this unsharp mask. And you can see now, you know, we're starting to not sharpen. There's no detail to sharpen now, or not much once you start bringing this Epson file up to this point. So there's only so much you can do with this. I would have this set low personally and try and just give it a little more. Again, knowing that when you transfer this to paper from a screen, you're going to lose a little bit of that sharpness. We'll just stop there for now, but we'll drop this back down. So if we view it at 50%, you know, it actually doesn't look that bad. So that's the Nikon at 66.7, which is probably a pretty good representation of what it's gonna look like on paper. If we do the same with this file, it's not as nice, but you know, it's gonna give you a pretty good 12 by 18 print. I don't think there's any issues with this at all, but you can tell that it's, you know, we're starting to kind of push what you could get out of this file. But in comparison from a detail standpoint, it's not bad. It's not as nice as the Nikon. You know, the web version looked great. The 8 by 12s looked very similar. We're starting to see a difference now with these 12 by 18 sizes, but it's not bad. And you know, you could, with both of these, I would obviously dig into this a little more if I was just using the Epson. I would kind of finesse this workflow. But for this video, the point of this is just to kind of show you, you know, when you have a really good scanner like that Nikon, you're getting these really kind of amazing files to work with right out of the scanning software with minimal sharpening, and you don't have to do too much with them. But when we look at the Epsons, I want this to kind of stress the importance of, you know, learning how to work with these files, coming up with a workflow to sharpen these images properly and size them properly. And you'll see that when you do that, they're actually quite capable. So that's the thing, is like you want to get a flatbed, maybe you shoot 35 and medium format, but you're just turned off by the fact that they aren't great for 35 mil. But the cool thing is, you know, spending some time working with these files, trying to find how to get the most out of this 35 mil. You know, I think if you aren't printing any bigger than 12 by 18, and especially if you're just doing smaller prints and for web, you can make these Epson files look quite nice. So maybe not as limiting as I initially thought. You know, I think it's just easy for me to go and use the Nikon and be blown away by the results from it. But if you treat these Epson files properly, you can make them actually look quite nice. So overall, I gotta say, I feel a little different about these Epson scanners now. And like we saw, if you know their limitations, I think you can still get some pretty nice results with 35mm film. And for me, obviously I'm not getting rid of the Nikon. That was never the intention. I print large quite regularly, so it's important for me to kind of have this no compromise approach where I can get the most from my film. But like we saw, if you're someone, you know, who's printing smaller, 8x12, even up to 12x18, sharing on the web, and you really kind of implement the right workflow, you can get some pretty nice looking results. So I hope this helped anyone who's maybe been struggling with this a little bit or hesitant to pick up an Epson Flatbed because they're unsure of the results. And yeah, just want to say thank you for watching as always, and I'll talk to you soon.